I've said this before, that I said this, but this time it's different, because this time the file didn't open. I thought I opened it, but no, the file was already open. In this house, there is no longer a difference between morning and night. Light is just a habit. Darkness feels like a decision. When I woke up, I checked my watch. It wasn't 3:17. But I didn't feel relieved, because there was no longer any reason to feel relieved. The house was silent. That used to be a good thing. Not anymore. Silence no longer means nothing is happening. Silence means that things are lining up. File 017 was on the table, but in a different place. I'm sure of it, because I always place the file at the corner of the table, against the wall, leaning to the right. This time it was in the middle, right in the center, as if someone was meant to sit across from it. I didn't touch the file, but I knew the pages had changed. If you ask me how I knew, I don't know. It's just the pages no longer feel like they belong to me. In this section, I need to tell you this first. If you've made it this far and you're still listening, you're no longer just a listener, because the file doesn't want to be read. It wants to be accompanied. I sat down on a chair directly across from the file, and for the first time I thought this: what if the file isn't watching me? What if I am the one watching the file? Something strange has been happening for a while now. When I talk about the past, the words have started to change places. I remember a sentence I said in episode 1, but now that sentence feels as if it no longer belongs to me, as if someone spoke through my mouth. There are events I remember, but I feel no emotion. There are events I don't remember, but I feel something. This inversion is not normal. There was a new line in file 017, but this line felt as if it had been read before. It was underlined. I don't underline things. Never. Because some sentences don't need emphasis. They already know their place. The line was this: some memories are written after they are lived. When I read that, I paused for a moment, because in that moment, a scene from my childhood came to mind. But this scene was not mine. A house. But this house is not the one I'm in right now. Older, smaller. And in that house as well, there was the same silence. Now I'll be honest with you. From this point on, I'm not sure which of the things I tell you actually happened, and which were placed later. But I am sure of this: something is editing my past, and it's not doing this because I noticed. It started doing this before I noticed. If right now you're thinking, I should rewind, do it. But be careful, because some sentences, when listened to a second time, do not remain the same. I'm stopping here, but the story isn't stopping. In the next block, I won't tell why the file didn't answer. I'll tell why it was the one that asked the question first. I thought the file wasn't answering. In fact, it had never answered at all. I was just the one waiting for an answer. I opened file 017. But this time, I didn't turn the pages. My hand wouldn't move. Because there are some things, if you touch them, they change places. And I was afraid of the file changing its place. The first thing I noticed was this. The pages were numbered, but not in order. After 17 came 4, then 12, then 1 again. This wasn't new. I had noticed it before, but before, I hadn't treated it as a problem. Now I did, because now I understood. This wasn't confusion. It was a choice. There was a new section in the file. It had no title. But at the very top of the page, hanging in the empty space, there was a sentence. It wasn't quite a title, not quite a note, as if someone's thought had been left unfinished. It read, "Questions come after answers." In that moment, for the first time, I was truly unsettled, because this sentence felt less like something the file was saying to me, and more like something I was saying to myself. But I had never thought this before. I moved a chair closer, not to the file, to the chair, because the distance between us wasn't being set by me. The file had already set it. A new paragraph began, but this time the typeface had changed. The same pen, the same ink, but the rhythm was different, slower, more certain. And as I read, I realized this paragraph had not been written before it was read. This paragraph came into existence at the moment it was read. Some questions are not asked, it said. They are placed. I wanted to stop, but I couldn't, because while reading this sentence, the questions I had asked before came to mind. But what I remembered weren't the questions. They were the answers. The file knew which questions I had asked, but there was something worse. It also knew which questions I had given up on asking. For a moment, I thought the file knew me. Then I realized that was the wrong thought. The file didn't know me. The file was made of me. Near the bottom of the page, a new line appeared. I say appeared because I can't find another word. I hadn't taken my eyes off the page, but the line wasn't there. Then it was. It read, "The narrator changed earlier than he thought." When I read this line, something inside me broke, because I was the narrator, or at least I thought I was. Now pay attention. What I realized at this point is very important. The file wasn't silencing me. It wasn't guiding me. The file was preparing to take my place. Suddenly, a scene I had described before came to mind. But this time, I was seeing the scene from the outside. I was there, but I wasn't speaking. Someone was using my voice. There was one final sentence in the file. It wasn't underlined. It wasn't emphasized, but it was heavier than the others. It said, "When the narration ends, who was speaking will no longer matter." I closed the file, but I realized this. The file wasn't closed. It had only stopped being read by me. I'm stopping here. But in the next block, I'll explain this. Why 317 is no longer a time, and why the file uses that moment. I hadn't been looking at 0317 for a while. This wasn't an escape. It was more like an agreement. I had chosen not to look at my watch, because when I did, I felt as if the time was looking back at me, and that feeling was exhausting. One day, I looked at my watch by accident. I phrase it this way because there was no accident in that moment. The time was there. I was here, and neither of us was expecting the other. 3:12. There were 5 minutes left, but that information was not comforting, because now I knew the time remaining until 3:17 was something that increased as it decreased. File 017 was on the table, but it was closed. At least, that's what I thought. In that moment, I realized that the file didn't change its behavior when it was open or closed. Only my behavior changed. 0314. There was a sound in the house. It wasn't the sound of something falling. It wasn't the sound of movement. It was more like the sound of displacement, but nothing had moved, at least as far as I could see. I realized this. As 3:17 approached, the things happening in the house weren't increasing. They were decreasing. Sounds were disappearing. Shadows were fixing in place. The air was becoming denser, as if the world was making room for something. 0316. In that moment, I felt that there was a new line in the file. I didn't look, but I knew, because I understood that this line wasn't written to be read, but to be felt. Now pay attention. What I'm describing here is not a moment of fear. This is a moment of realization. When 3:17 arrived, nothing happened. Truly, no sound, no movement, no shadow. And right here, everything broke. Because I had said it before, nothing happening at 3:17 was the worst thing that could happen. But this time what I realized was different. 0317 had not arrived. It had passed. When the clock reached 0318, no relief came, nor at 0319. because now I understood this. 317 was not tied to a minute. It was a threshold, and that threshold had been crossed. I opened the file. This time, I truly opened it. And for the first time, I noticed that something was missing between the pages. A page was gone. It hadn't been torn out. It hadn't been removed, as if it had never existed. But the rest of the file knew of that page's existence. In the place where the page should have been, there was a single sentence. This sentence was different from the others, because this time it wasn't describing me. It was describing me to time. It read, "A moment ends when it is noticed." In that moment, I understood this. The power of 317 didn't come from me looking at it. It came from me waiting for it. And I had been waiting for a very long time. They say waiting is not an action, but that isn't true. Waiting is the most dangerous action, because when you wait, you fix your position, and something comes to that place. That night, for the first time, I didn't sleep, but I wasn't awake either. Time split into pieces. There was a moment, but that moment had no beginning or end, and that was 317, exactly that. A new section had begun in the file. It had a title. For the first time, the title was After, but nothing described beneath it belonged to after. All of it had already happened. In this block, I need to say this clearly, 0317 will not return, because it was not something that simply happened and ended. It was something that changed its place, and now it is somewhere else. I'm stopping here. But in the next block, we're moving to a far more disturbing place. Because from now on, the issue is not time. The issue is who I am. Lately, when I start talking about myself, I suddenly fall silent. This isn't because I can't find the words. On the contrary, it's because there are too many words. When I say I don't know which version of myself I mean. This isn't a new problem. It's just that it's no longer hidden. It used to be easy to say I, a voice, a body, a past. Now when I say I, more than one thing shifts places at once, and I can't be sure which one is speaking. File 017 is still on the table, but when I look at it now, I don't feel like I'm looking at a stranger. It's more like looking into a mirror, and the image in the mirror sometimes moves a second before I do. Sometimes it doesn't move at all. I realize this. I no longer feel like I'm reading the sentences written in the file. I remember them, But this remembering isn't something coming from the past. It's like already knowing a sentence I'm about to say a moment from now. Sometimes I stop while speaking, in the middle of a sentence, because when I continue, I can't tell who is saying it. At this point, I have to admit this. I am not the narrator, or at least not the only narrator. There's a paragraph in the file. It isn't underlined. It has no title. But every time I read it, I get stuck on the same sentence. It says, "Identity is carried by the voice." The first time I read this sentence, it seemed insignificant. Not anymore. Because when I listen to my voice, sometimes it doesn't feel like it belongs to me. I listen to my own recording. I shouldn't have done that, but I did. And I noticed this. There are some sentences I don't remember, but my voice says them with complete certainty. The emphasis is right. The tone is right. As if they had been rehearsed many times. Now I'm going to tell you something. I'm saying this for the first time. Sometimes I don't feel like I'm telling this story for the first time. Sometimes it feels like I'm continuing from where someone else left off. The name Elias has been feeling unfamiliar to me for a while now. When I hear this name, I turn to look, but the reaction inside me is this. Does this belong to me? They say names are like that. They wear down over time. But this isn't wear. This is displacement. There's a new sentence in the file. This sentence isn't looking at me like the others. This time, it passes beside me. It says, "The narrator relaxes when he transfers his voice." When I read this sentence, I felt a sense of relief, and that frightened me, because relief usually comes after giving up. There's something else I have been noticing lately. While narrating, I deliberately include certain details, but I don't know why I include them. As if someone wants certain parts of the story not to be forgotten, and I accept that. Now, when I look back, I realize this. I didn't read the file. I became the way the file is read. And this shift happened very quietly. The unraveling of identity doesn't happen all at once. It doesn't happen in a single night. It happens through small acceptances. I'll think about this later. I can skip this detail. It's better if I tell it this way. Right here, something settles in. Now I know this. I am not telling this story. But I'm not resisting it being told either. Because some stories need a voice. And that voice doesn't always belong to its owner. I'm stopping here. But in the next block, I'll face this truth, that from this point on, I don't want to go back. Because the issue now is not what I am. The issue is whether I will stay. After a certain point, you stop looking for a reason to leave. Leaving requires too much energy. Staying, on the other hand, asks for nothing. When I first realized this, I felt ashamed, because we always think like this. Staying equals surrender. Leaving equals strength. But in this story, that equation doesn't work. File 017 no longer calls out to me. This matters. If there's a call, you resist. If there's a threat, you run. But an invitation is far more dangerous. For a while now, I've been able to leave the file unopened, but I can't close it. Do you feel the difference? Right there, within reach, silent, waiting, as if it's saying, whenever you're ready. What does it mean to be ready? While searching for an answer, I realized this. Preparation is not deciding to do something. Preparation is deciding to no longer resist. One night, I fell asleep beside the file. I'm saying this deliberately, beside it, not on it, not under it, beside it. This is a form of habit. When I woke up, everything in the room was in place, but I felt misplaced, as if I had woken up on the wrong side, and that feeling wasn't frightening. It was familiar. Now I'm going to ask you something, but I don't want you to answer. Just think, if a place doesn't harm you but changes you, is it dangerous? There was a new line in the file. This line was different from the others. Not an order, not a definition, more like a suggestion. It read, "Staying is sufficient for the continuation of the narrative." What unsettled me in this sentence wasn't staying. It was the word sufficient. To be sufficient. How long has it been since someone told you that? The file isn't asking for more from me. This is important. No confession, no sacrifice, no courage, just my presence. And that request is very human. At some point, I accepted this. I am not excess here. On the contrary, I am filling a void. I thought about my own life. How many places have I simply been there? Meetings, rooms, people. I took up space without doing anything, and no one complained. The file knows this. That's why it doesn't shout. That's why it doesn't frighten. Because this is the only role I'm used to. I can say this now. I didn't choose to stay. I never seriously considered leaving. Sometimes a person doesn't lose themselves. They simply quietly leave a place they don't want to be found. But here, getting lost is a kind of settling in. Now I understand. File 017 didn't pull me in. It pushed me toward everything outside, the noise, the identities, the obligations. And here within the silence, I became lighter. Is this surrender? No. Surrender is knowing that you've lost something. I don't feel like I've lost anything. And that's what's truly frightening. Staying here is easy because it doesn't ask me to be me. It only asks me to continue. And maybe the most dangerous stories begin right here. When a person gets used to staying. I'm stopping here, but it isn't over. There's one more block. And in that block, I'll have to answer this question. If I stay, who will tell my story? Lately, I've been noticing this. While narrating, I don't hear myself. The sentences come out, but the voice doesn't feel like it belongs to me. Had I gone mad? In madness, a person claims everything. I, on the other hand, am losing ownership. In a story, the most dangerous moment is when the narrator is questioned. Because if the narrator falls, there is no truth left, only what remains. There was a section in File 017. I'm sure I hadn't seen it before. But when I opened it, it felt as if it had always been there. There was no title, just a question. Who is telling the story? My first reflex was simple. Me. But that answer came too quickly. Answers that come quickly are usually memorized. I looked more carefully. The file wasn't asking for my name. It wasn't asking for my voice. It was asking for my authority. Telling a story is not just speaking. Telling a story is deciding what stays outside. And I can no longer decide that. There are moments I think I remember, but that have no details. As if someone had said, "Don't tell this." But it wasn't a voice. It was an edit. In that moment, I understood this. The file isn't silencing me. It's editing me. Do you know when a narrator becomes dangerous? When he thinks he's the center of the story. But I am not the center. I am a channel. File 017 doesn't want a story. It wants to be the story. And for that, it needs someone. But not a hero, a transmitter. At some point, while speaking, I became estranged from my own sentences. I don't know if you noticed. The tone changed. The pauses increased. Some words are too perfectly placed. This is not a coincidence, because I am no longer choosing the narrative. The narrative is choosing me. Now I'm going to tell you something very important. Listen carefully. When a story takes over its narrator, the first thing it does is this. It convinces him that he still has control. I was convinced too, for a long time. Until I saw this line in the file, the narrator may change, the story remains. This sentence didn't frighten me. That was worse. This sentence relieved me, because for a moment I thought this. So my leaving isn't a problem either. This is where the danger lies. When a person accepts that they are replaceable, they let something go. They let go of resistance. So who is the narrator? Me, the file? Or, at this point, I have to involve you. Because right now, these words are being read somewhere. And that place is not my mind. A story is not completed the moment it is read. A story continues the moment it is read. You may not realize it, but you too are making a choice right now. By continuing to listen, you are saying this. You may tell it. This is permission. File 017 needs this, not my voice. Continuation. So now I must say this. The narrator of this story is not a single person. This story is being shared. And everywhere it is shared, something shifts place. I was the first me, but I won't be the last. And this is not a threat. It's an observation. After a while, you'll realize this. When you think about this story, you don't mention my name. You just say, the file. And that's when the narrator has changed. I'm stopping here. But this is not an ending. This is the transfer of the word. A story does not end when it is not told. It simply changes places. Now I have to understand this. From this point on, telling and living are not the same thing. And I am not telling. For a while now, events have been happening before the words arrive. This matters. Normally, a person thinks first, then tells. But here, it happens first. Then something is left missing. What's missing is not meaning. There is more than enough meaning. What's missing is distance. What makes a story safe is that small gap between the narrator and the event. My gap has closed. File 017 no longer opens new pages. The concept of a page is gone. Nothing is continuing. Something is ongoing. Do you know how I understood this? One night, I didn't wake up, but morning came. I don't know what time it was. It wasn't 3:17, but it wasn't a time anyway. There was a threshold, and I don't remember that threshold. In stories, people don't remember a certain point. They call it trauma. But here, what's forgotten is not fear. Here, what's forgotten is the beginning. There is no longer a first. The first page, the first night, the first voice. They are all in the same place. That's why I can't tell it. Because telling requires sequence. Here, there is no sequence. A while ago, while looking at the file, I realized this. I wasn't looking at the file. The file was positioning me. The reader and the read had switched places, but it wasn't noticed because the transition was soft. People think danger is harsh. No. Danger feels compatible. No one asks me questions anymore because questions require answers. Here, there are no answers, only a state. When you're inside a state, you don't ask, what's happening? You simply adapt. The thing that relieved me the most was this. I no longer have the possibility of being wrong. To be wrong, you need a goal. Here, there is no goal. Here, there is continuation. Now I realize this. File 017 is not an entity, not a place, not even a time. The file is a form. And when you enter that form, everything looks normal. That's why no one escapes. Right now, as you listen to these words, you might be thinking this. This is a story. Yes. But notice how easily you say that sentence. When you call it a story, you place yourself outside it. But some stories don't allow that. I no longer have an outside. And this doesn't create panic. That matters too. If there were panic, I would run. But I am settling in. After a while, you realize this. The things that aren't told are more permanent. So I need to say one last thing. This is not a warning. This is information. This story does not end here, because things that end are remembered. This story stays here. And if one day you find yourself thinking this feels familiar to me, that's when the narrator has completely changed. I am no longer speaking. I am only holding a place. The file is closed, but that does not mean it is shut. And perhaps the most accurate final sentence is this: what is lived is not told. It simply settles in.